Tonight, I am going to be beginning with the book Preparing to Die by Andrew Holecek. And as I go through this book, I will be bringing in some material from other sources as well. But tonight, I'm going to start with the foreword and just kind of go through the beginning sections of the book. The foreword is by Tulku Tondrup Nyingma. He was a visiting scholar at Harvard. I never met him. I've never read any of his work, so I am not very familiar with him, but it's an interesting little foreword that he wrote. And he begins by saying that life is an endless cycle of birth, life, death, and rebirth. And of course, since it is endless and it has a lot of suffering in it, we would like to get out. That's why we're practicing Buddhism. And also, he says that there are ways that we can influence our future lives. And they are karma and our habits is one, and then intense practice, which results in recognizing our own mind, the nature of our mind. Either of these will influence, or both of them can influence our future life and how we will experience things during our future life. Lama Karma talked about this, that our experiences are a result of our karmic seeds that we have planted. This is one thing we take with us from lifetime to lifetime. We leave everything else behind, but we take with us our karma and our habitual patterns. So it's important that we train our minds with prayers, meditation, and caring for others while we are alive. And this book is kind of a guide that will help us, you might say, our passage through the bardo into our next life. And he recommends this, that we should saturate our life with the Dharma. We should visualize, feel, and believe that we are in front of the Buddha with his all-knowing wisdom and his unconditional love. Imagine that we are in his world of light, peace, and joy. The visualizations are, of course, made out of light. They're not solid. And then he says, sing prayers with devotion to the Buddha. And believe that when he says sing, he means chant. But you could sing too. I know I've been in a car with Tibetan when they just kind of sing, oh, Mani Padme Hung. However you are comfortable doing that. And then he says to sing with loving kindness, wishing all sentient beings have joy and so forth. And as a result of these positive habits, quote, the result will be that after death and in our next life, the world will appear to us, will be a pure land of peace and joy. Then he says, these following teachings in the book are for, quote, highly accomplished adepts, or at least serious meditators, end quote. Then he says, most of us will not notice the nature of mind when it appears. So because of that, he recommends developing these habitual patterns that will propel us through the bardos. As much as studying, it isn't to ignore what follows in the book, but to realize that your habitual patterns, for many of us, are going to be more important than our spiritual attainment in what propels us through the bardo. And he says these trainings are highly beneficial and they're easier to do. So for those of you that don't have time to do a 3-year retreat or 2 3-year retreats and so on and so forth, then just develop these habitual patterns, practice regularly, do what you can, dedicate your merit. In your spare time, say mantra and so on and so forth when you've got a moment. All of this is extremely beneficial when you die. And as we'll go into later, what's really important is to be able to relax and let go. He finishes up by saying, well, everybody is going to die. So this book is important for anyone who will die and for anyone who wishes to go through the bardo with the blessings of the Dharma. Next comes the introduction, and he starts with 2 quotes here. The quotes by Rinpoches of various traditions generally tend to be teachers that have had significant contact with Western students. So the first quote is by Anyan Rinpoche. If we are duly prepared, I can promise that the moment of death will be an experience of rejoicing. If we are not prepared, it will surely be a time of fear and regret. And then he quotes William Shakespeare. Be still prepared for death, and death or life shall thereby be the sweeter. So life is precious, death is precious. We can make rapid spiritual progress at the time of death and directly influence where we will take rebirth. Lamas and friends can benefit us at the time of death. We're going into unknown territory. On the other hand, we can progress quickly in this unknown territory if we can relax and let go. We can progress more quickly in the bardo than when we're alive. On the other hand, we can go down just as quickly, if not more quickly, when we're dead as when we're alive. So ignorance, fear, confusion, these things we need to try to work through while we are alive. Denial is a problem when we're alive, and it's more of a problem when we are dying and going through the bardo. So he says we have a choice quote, we can either curse the darkness or turn on the light. And there are two benefits that we can receive from reading this book, and that is we can benefit ourselves as we go through the bardo, and we can benefit others as they go through the bardo if they precede us in death. At this time, it's important to have confidence, and it's extremely important to be compassionate. He says then that death is the entry to the pure realms, and it's the entry to the six realms. That's why it's so important. It's a door, and of course, we want to enter the doorway to the pure realms, and we want to avoid entering the six realms again. And if we can't avoid that, we want to have a precious human rebirth in our next life. He then says that there are two ways of looking at this book, and that is that it is an in-depth study of death and dying in Vajrayana Buddhism, more scholarly. Or you can look at it as a practical guide, a manual to working with death in a skillful way. And this, of course, is the main purpose. He compares death to birth for these reasons, that our time of greatest need or vulnerability is at birth and at death. And both at birth and at death, we are entering new territory. We're entering the world of the living or the world of the dead. This book maps out the territory. This helps us learn what to do and when to do it. It helps us develop confidence. He considers the experience of death to be sacred. Quote, a good death is defined by a complete openness to whatever arises. At the time of death, it's even more important than when you're alive to realize plans are fantasies, circumstances change, that we need to be flexible for whatever arises. And the book contains guidelines, not rules. And it is a map and not a path. So be flexible, be open, relax. And we'll go into how to do this later on. But he says surrender is more important than control. Relax, lighten up. If you can, if you fixate on trying to know everything and doing everything correctly, you're too tight, because it'll never happen that way. And ignoring death is too loose. So you could say that this book is taking the middle way between too tight and too loose. He recommends learning as much as you can, study, practice, prepare, And when the time comes, he says being present is important. Use mindfulness and, as always, be courageous. Now, I have a quote here by Tralek Rinpoche that is not in the book, but it's one of my favorite quotes. And he did not use it in terms of the bardo and death and dying, but I think it's important, whatever you are doing in life, any time of life. And it's about our self-image, how we view ourselves. So the quote is, healthy self-image is accommodating, it is forgiving, it permits and allows. It does not demand perfection from us. Perfection is something that we aspire to. It is being gentle with oneself, warts and all, accepting all aspects of oneself, forgiving one's failures and defects, and accepting that we can sometimes make mistakes and fail. By thinking like this, having that big vision and positive self-image, one can accommodate all aspects of oneself and still continue to strive for one's own betterment. So as you are dying, do the best that you can and don't expect more, and don't be hard on yourself when you feel that you weren't able to do as well as you thought you could or thought you should. Wayne Dyer has said, don't should on yourself. So I think that's good advice too. So anyway, it's important to have a guru or a teacher, to have interviews with your teacher, to study under a teacher. The appropriate guidance at the appropriate time can be of great benefit. He finishes up by saying the aspiration of this book is to help provide appropriate guidance at the time of strong confusion and emotions. And he says, refer to it, and then, as with death itself, let it go. So that finishes that section. Next comes the overview. And he begins this by saying that this book takes the law of karma as immutable, that the law of karma is something that you cannot bend to your liking or to your advantage. If you understand karma or begin to understand karma, this can help you understand reincarnation. What came to my mind is a book by Tralek Rinpoche, if you want to learn more about karma. The book is Karma, What It Is, What It Isn't, Why It Matters, by Tralek Rinpoche. So if you really want to get into karma, this is a in-depth teaching on karma. So it is our karma that, unless we are able to have developed some of the more advanced practices, it is karma that leads us through the bardo. Frequently, the term is the winds of karma propel us through the bardo. And bardo means gap between one state and another state. And in the dying process and what follows, there are three bardos: the painful bardo of dying, the luminous bardo of dharmata, and the karmic bardo of becoming. And they refer to the before, the during, and the after the structure of the book, the author says. So the painful bardo of dying begins with disease or a condition that ends in death. Can be sudden death too, for instance, in an accident. And it is considered painful because it hurts to let go. And of course, some deaths are going to be painful. For instance, being in a car accident can be quite painful. And some diseases can be quite painful during the dying process, both physically and psychologically. So that's why it is called the painful bardo of dying. Now, the next bardo is the luminous bardo of dharmata. That begins with the end of the bardo of dying. And here, dharmata is the nature of reality. This is a enlightened state. This is when you have these deities that appear that are incredibly brilliant, and there is a lot of sound, overwhelming sound, overwhelming brightness, and so forth. And so it's called luminous because of the brightness, the luminosity of these enlightened deities that appear, but they can appear sometimes in wrathful forms. And even if it is Chenrezi that appears, because of the brilliance and because of the sounds and so forth, it still can be frightening. I remember friends of mine had a young girl. This was a few decades ago. And they were telling me I think I was visiting them, and they were saying their daughter was at the store and there was the Easter bunny, and she started crying. And I asked her then, well, why did you cry when you saw the Easter bunny? He was 6 feet tall. She was only, 5 years old. And that didn't include the ears. So, Chenrezi might seem very nice when you've got a statue of him on your shrine. But if you see him in the Bardo, and he is immense and huge, and there's all kinds of brilliance and incredible amount of sound. They talk about like 1,000 thunderbolts all at one time. Well, it might not be so warm and fuzzy for you. So then is the karmic bardo of becoming. And here is where you enter a womb if you're going to have a human birth. So this is what decides what your next life is going to be, what form you're going to be in. And he goes into this very interesting question, and that is because of cultural differences, personal idiosyncrasies, does everyone experience these bardos the same way, especially the luminous bardo of dharmata? The answer is, depending upon who you ask, it can be experienced differently because of cultural and personal differences. He mentions Tibetans are emotionally reserved. They will not usually cry out when someone is nearing death, because this could affect adversely the dying person. Whereas Westerners, emotions are permissible, expected. He feels that the middle way between repressed feelings and, quote, frantic grasping is a good way when you are with people that are dying or sick and headed that direction. Again, I remember when my grandmother was close to death. She had 7 children, and many of the children and a few other people, like me, a grandchild, would be in her room, and nobody would come close to her. They would stand at a distance from the bed. And I think that it would be good to stand a little closer to the bed. And we'll go into exactly how to be with a person that is dying. But it's important to realize these different cultural approaches. And of course, my family was Scandinavian, and Scandinavians too do not openly show a lot of feelings, that they tend to be very reserved. The issue, he says, it's very simple: cultural modifications versus universal truth. I heard it explained this way one time about why Buddhism has taken the different forms it has in different countries that it has gone to. And this kind of helps explain this also, that if you would take a clear crystal ball, and if I would hold it here, it would be maroon colored. If I'd hold it here, it would be gold colored. If I would hold it against a white wall, it would be white colored, but the crystal ball would be unaffected. It would just be its appearance that would change. So to sum this up, yes, you might experience the deities in slightly different form than the way they are described or the way they are in Tibetan artwork, but you will definitely experience the deities. Then he talks about why he feels he's qualified to write this book. And he says that his personal experience has given him confidence in the Dharma, these teachings, and so forth, that he has been, as of the publication date of the book, meditating for 35 years. He's done a 3-year retreat. He's done most of the practices that are mentioned in the book under the guidance of Tibetan masters. And he's met many masters in India, Tibet, and Nepal to help him reinforce all of this. Quote, these extraordinary individuals display a fearlessness around death that is as contagious as it is awe-inspiring. So that ends that chapter. Next is why I wrote this book. He has a story about Susan, whose husband is dying. The husband had little interest in Buddhism. Susan had little interest in Buddhism, but she wanted to know what to do. She had no experts to turn to, but she turned to Alexander. the author of the book, and he advised her the best that he could. Then after her husband died, she said, quote, "I should have prepared earlier. If only I had prepared earlier." This gave him the resolve to write this book. By writing this book, he's trying to, you might say, deprive death of its greatest advantage over us. This is to allow us to develop a way contrary to the common one, which is to deny death, to ignore it, to put it off, to kick it down the road, so to speak. This book will remove the strangeness of death and the resulting uncomfortableness that we can have about death, that we can become used to it, we can come to know it, that this will help us relax, help us give confidence, and reduce our fear of death. So to practice death is to practice freedom. I think that's a very good saying. A person who has practiced death and has learned how to die has unlearned how to be a slave. He says that he's been on the side of many who have died, from his own loved ones to spiritual friends. And for the past 8 years that he has done a number of seminars on the Tibetan view of death and what happens next. And he's written a lot of articles about this. And that this has given him conviction that allows him to be involved with other people in end-of-life situations, that he's no longer afraid of death, and he's not swayed by the events that go around a person and the family and the friends of a person who is dying. And he feels that the information in the book that he has written, that we're going to be studying, has given him confidence in the information, confidence in the teachers who he has received this information from, and the practices that he has done. The next section here is how to use the book. So the book is comprehensive. It's simple. It's a practical reference manual on death and dying. And it is gathering information together that you can use when you need it most. The book is divided into parts, and if you look at the table of contents, I think it covers 4 or 5 pages. And so the parts are what to do before, what to do during, and what to do after. And then for what to do for oneself and what to do for others. Well, actually, the 2 sections are spiritual preparation. The second section is practical preparation. And then, as I said, that's divided further into what to do before, during, and after for self and other in both of these sections. Then he has what's termed heart advice from Tibetan masters. And advice is usually very short teachings that try to get to the core, the heart of the teachings. They're sometimes called pith instructions. And each section, which I just went through it briefly, they are clearly defined. They're identified in the table of contents to help you find the information that you need. He says the material is cross-referenced and indexed so you can locate what you need to in the book. The Sanskrit and the Tibetan words are defined, he says, on their first use. There's no glossary, but he says if you come across a term that you want to know what its definition is, go to the index and go to the first page that this term is mentioned on, and that will give you your definition. And that completes this short section on how to use the book. Then is familiarity. And here we need to be familiar with what's going on in the bardos and the difficulties that we are going to face if we're going to, you might say, navigate the bardos successfully. The table of contents is very complete. Contents are complicated with many facets, but there are just many, many, many listings. And it's good to familiarize yourself with the way the book is put together and you might say, the flow of the book. The more we understand the book and the flow, the more we are going to know about the process of dying. We can reduce the unknown. That will reduce fear. And of course, ignorance doesn't work very well. Pretending that it's not going to happen doesn't work very well. With ignorance, more problems arise. And instead of having fewer problems, it's just that you're not aware of the problem until the problem is right in front of your face and you have to do something. And without preparation, you have worse outcomes. So the book helps us relax, knowing the details and the bigger picture, different points of view, and it helps us to become more familiar with the situations that we are going to find ourselves in and other people are going to be in, that we're going to be working with other people, and help us with preparation and so forth. A little further down in this book, there is a quote by Chagda Toku Rinpoche, which I think is extremely wise and practical, and it is, when you have to go to the bathroom, it's too late to dig a latrine. When you have to go to the bathroom, it's too late to dig a latrine. So this is why we want to avoid ignorance and not dealing with it till the last moment. As we are approaching death, we will find attachment, aversion, and ignorance arise with some practice and so forth. We'll find they are workable. and that even young children can benefit from the knowledge that's in this book. And I want to add this, and that is that my grandmother was a funeral director. Her husband died before I was born, and so grandma was a working single woman. And when I would visit her, even as a young child, my parents would take me to grandma at the funeral home. And it was no big deal to me because, well, this is grandma. What I'm saying here is what he is saying too, and that this can be presented to children in a way that can help them, that they don't have to be protected from death. If you think about it, many families these days have pets. Pets die. It's very common for a child to have a pet die. Even that can be a very valuable lesson, a very valuable learning experience. And children on farms see lots of animals die, either purposely because their head was cut off and they were plucked and then roasted, or because they died from accident, disease, or whatever, that it's protecting a child from death is really counterproductive. In fact, that's what the Buddha's parents did with him. They did not want him to be experience the problems of sickness, old age, death, and they protected him from that. And then as he got older, he went out and he realized that, yes, people die, people get sick, people get old. And then he decided to become a spiritual person, and he accomplished what he had set out to do, which was to become victorious over birth, old age, sickness, and death. And finally, medical professionals, of course, need to know about death and sickness and so forth. All of this can help us.